So welcome everybody to yet another episode in the Energize with Bram podcast. Joining me today is the CEO of Police Health. His name is Scott Williams. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bram. Glad to be here.
You're dressed really special. Scott, tell us a little bit more about.
Well, I dress for you, sir. I dress for you. No, Melbourne Cup. So we do a little bit of an event at work. We have best dressed male and best dressed female. But as the CEO, I cannot win. But that doesn't stop me getting into the theme of it. So
absolutely.
I didn't wear the hat. I took that off for the podcast. I think that might have been a bit too much.
Yeah, that's it. So it was a 19...
like the old pork pie felt hat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes the outfit, I'll be honest, but it's not for the podcast.
You lead by example, clearly.
That's right. It's all about leading by example.
Absolutely. And this is, the leading piece is it's basically the reason why I asked you to come into the show today, because one thing that I've, from working with you and your team, one thing that is very clear to me is that you're a very emotionally intelligent leader. And I don't say this lightly because I've had the privilege of working with a lot of leaders in the last 17 years. And I just think that you have something that is quite rare in the leadership space. And so I'd like us to potentially, first of all, go back to maybe where it all started, because even though you're now in financial services, really,
yeah, pretty
right?
much.
It didn't start there.
No.
So take us back to kind of where it all started.
Thank you for that introduction and those kinds of words. And we'll come back to that, because one of the things that I struggled with early on as a leader was the fact that I was a very emotional leader. And I've learned to realize how much that is a strength, not a weakness, but we'll come back to that. So I started out my career as a nurse. Trained in the hospital. It was the last year you could actually train in the hospital. The university program had been running for a while. I was always growing up torn between being a teacher or being a nurse. And actually in year 11, when I was 15, my grandmother, who was an enrolled nurse for many, many years, sadly passed away during my year 11 exams. And that was the turning point for me when I decided that I'd be a nurse. Did my year 12 and then got into nursing, trained in the hospital system. It was tough. And I think...
Tough in what sense?
I think, so I was 17 and a half when I started nursing. So I'd finished school when I was 16 in year 12. So it's technically a year younger than most people. Wasn't because I was super smart. I think it's because I was the second born, the youngest of my family. And I think my parents wanted to get me into school earlier rather than later to get rid of me. So I think there was a level of maturity still for me, and I was growing up. So 17, and I think I worked on a heavy medical ward. That was my very first placement. And 5 weeks into nursing, so at 17 and a half, I laid out my first dead body.
Wow.
So...
bit confrontational, I imagine, as an emotional person.
Hugely. And I was fortunate to be paired with a very experienced nurse who sort of taught or helped me how to manage that situation, and which I thought was fantastic. So as confronting as it was the realization that actually someone who can be there and support you and show a degree of vulnerability actually could be a real strength. And I probably didn't realize it at the time, but it was someone that probably set me on the path where I am today.
Interesting. And then from then onwards, what sort of roles have you done?
Yeah, so I finished my training and then decided that I wanted to specialize in pediatrics. So I did my bachelor's in pediatrics, did some renal nursing, dialysis for a while, worked in Port Augusta for 4 years, which is where I'm actually born, but I grew up in the territory. And then decided to go to the UK. So with my then ex-wife, and moved to Birmingham. Didn't pick up the accent. No offense to all my friends and colleagues in Birmingham, but all right. So I worked over there as what they called a registered sick children's nurse. So RSCN, that was the actual title. Was supposed to be 12 months. And despite a little hiatus of coming back to Australia for a year, ended up being 10 years.
Gosh.
So I had my three kids over there, and ended up moving into management roles purely by accident. So I think, when I first started nursing, my goal was to be the person who ran around with a defib trolley and defibrillated people. I thought that was my absolute career goal. And then one thing led to another, and I started managing wards and then managing departments, and then ended up managing hospitals.
So how did you say it was kind of by accident the first time around? So how was that?
So I was looking at a specialist role, so particularly going into what they called a clinical nurse specialist in the UK. And the ward manager had got a promotional opportunity and was leaving. And so the service manager approached me and said, I'd really like it if you would do the ward manager role. And I said, it's not really me. I'm not really into managing people. And she actually said, look, I think you'd be really good at it. I think you have a natural way with people, and you always have a good rapport with the families and the children. I think give it a go. So I did. And I actually probably underestimated how hard it is to manage people when you're trying to navigate it yourself.
Absolutely. And you were still pretty young from it.
Yeah. So at that point, I think I was 27, 28 and was the ward manager.
Wow.
And then I look at the time between when I took my very first manager role to when I became a CEO, my first CEO gig, and that was at 41. So it was,
Quite a
huge, a growth time, but a lot of challenges in that time. So
before we get to the challenges, because I think it's always important that we start there and see like how that has contributed to your personal growth.
Yep.
Clearly, this woman saw something in you that you hadn't really discovered yourself yet.
Yeah, I just don't think. I suppose you have a vision sometimes when you're growing up about where you think life's going to go, and that's the way you follow it. So I had assumed that I was going to become a specialist in nursing, so more and more experienced as and there was definitely that career path in nursing. You could go down that road, even to a nurse consultant level in the UK. But then to be sort of someone grab you by the collar and sort of take you in a different direction was a little bit surprising. So what I hadn't probably appreciated and what she saw was some of that emotional intelligence, that ability to connect with people, the ability to be aware and read someone else's emotional state were actually very transferable skills. And that's what made me a good nurse. I was fortunate because that's what also has helped me become a good leader. I wasn't a good leader at that point, but I had some of those attributes that were going to help me to get where I am today. And I'm still learning.
Absolutely.
I still don't consider myself, a leader who's got it all together. Far from it. I think any leader that probably professes that, I would be wary of, because you've stopped wanting to learn.
Absolutely.
And you've not really got a learning mindset anymore. And I think true leadership is always wanting to learn a little bit more.
A great leader is always a learner.
Very true.
And I definitely have seen that coming to play for you. Tell us a little bit more about the challenges along the way. Like as a leader, as somebody who initially was a specialist or trained in a certain thing, then from a practitioner, then goes to people management, let alone leadership.
Yeah.
What have been some of the challenges and learning lessons along the way?
So I think sort of funny but challenging at the same time, rostering. Rostering was probably the biggest bugbear of my life as a ward manager, because it was like you couldn't satisfy anybody. So every time you did the roster, everyone was going to be a little bit unhappy about whatever shift they had.
Did everybody try to get good with you though?
Oh yeah, very good. And it was really hard for a colleague of mine who we were friends outside of work, because we worked together in similar roles. And then I got promoted into the ward manager role and she was still on the ward. Her and I struggled a bit because she felt I actually gave her the even worse shifts. No, I was less favourable to her, in the fear of being perceived as being favourable. So she used to think she got a harder deal, which is possibly true, I think. I was probably very conscious of how people perceived that relationship. And I think the reason why I said it was hard and funny is I felt like I was damned if I did and damned if I didn't. And
can't win anyway.
And I think because I was probably a lot more externally referenced back then. And what I mean by that is I put more of my sense of value in what other people thought or reacted to me. So I think it's
so kind of seeking
important.
for people's approval.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that the approval seeking, certainly. And I think, part of that has definitely shifted over time. And I think that's been one of my greatest strengths, is not being anchored in someone else's approval. So that was sort of the light challenges. I think my very first disciplinary, so doing a disciplinary on a staff member, I remember feeling absolutely sick the day of doing it. These feelings of guilt that I was about to, talk to someone about something about their behaviour not being acceptable and their conduct, and potentially on that occasion not necessarily ending in their termination, but that has happened since then with other people. And I remember someone telling me, quite senior, you need to harden up, because this is part of the job. Part of a leader is making tough decisions and And so I thought at that point that in order to be a good leader, I needed to not be as emotional. And that was the first time that I probably would say that I'd gone in a different direction, and I would say not the right direction.
Different being, where did it take you?
Different in that I think I needed to be tougher and be less emotive. And up until that point, not realizing that had been one of my strengths, that we're human. At the end of the day, regardless of what we do, who we are, what position we hold, we're human beings, which means we're going to get things right, we're going to get things wrong, we're going to learn, we're going to grow. We're not always going to get on with everybody, but that doesn't mean there's any malintent or any other reason. So, I believe if you do feel uncomfortable having to sit down and tell someone that things aren't okay and that behavior is not okay, it's not that it's difficult, and I'm conscious about not using that word because I think sometimes that has a very negative connotation. It's okay to feel that way because you are a human being. So I'm more concerned of a manager that has no problem going in and telling someone they're doing the wrong thing and not showing any emotion about it.
No care.
And
care factor is big.
Yeah.
Completely for you as well.
Well, huge. We have this saying that, I talk about this with my managers when I always say, that I do this with genuine care. You know that I genuinely care and love you. And we use the word love.
I love how you said that. Thank you for saying it. It
freaks people out sometimes. So you can probably think some people new to the organization think it might be a cult, but love has such a broad connotation. And, if I think about as a parent, when you discipline your children about something, you're doing it from a position of love.
True.
Because it is about helping them to grow and become a better person. It might be because they've done something that could have created a level of risk for them. So, or worse. So, from my point of view, that's still from a basis of love. So why can't that be the same in a work environment?
Yeah, it's sometimes a bit of a no-go labeled word, but I think it's got the perfect ground to also flourish in business.
Well, think about where it comes from. It's, and we're humans. So I have this, what I call my day from hell. So this is what I measure my level of resilience on. So if I'm ever having a bad day, I always remember this day. And it was in the UK. And I was what they call the exec on call that particular day. So I had an on-site manager who was to look at bed flow and arrival of patients and discharging. And it started snowing early. And Birmingham, despite the fact that it would snow in Birmingham, everything seemed to always grind to a halt whenever it snowed in the UK. So on this particular occasion, it started snowing about 3:00 in the afternoon. So we started to send administrative people home early just to be on the safe side. And this particular manager, it was her first time doing the on-site manager role. So she was experienced, but first time being on site, on charge for the hospital, as it were. And I was back up. So I left the site about 5:00. And at 5:30, I was still 3 cars just outside the car park of the hospital. So just to grind to a halt.
Gosh.
And in the end, it took me 6 hours to get home. Normally took me 45 minutes because traffic just seized up. It was ridiculous. But I just remember taking this call time and time again from this on-call manager, and every time she called me, her voice was getting more and more hysterical. And it went from basically towards the very end where I could feel like she was about to collapse in just tears. There were 54 patients who couldn't get home because there was no way for someone to pick them up. 9 of the 11 wards had no night duty staff because nobody could get in.
Oh, gosh.
I had a condemned building that I was considering putting people in just to create beds because we had another 60 patients in the emergency department that couldn't get into beds because there were no beds. So it was just, and then I think it was about 11:30 at night. It was like everything just happened. People went home, people moved into the beds, staff turned up. It was like, oh, the heavens opened.
That's like 6 hours of agony.
So and what I found was I was managing and trying to reassure her. And my focus was part of me was like, I don't know what to do next. But I wanted to support her and give her some confidence. And then I was ringing the CEO actually saying like, this is a problem, what are we going to do? So that was my ability. So that's my resilience level. So now when I'm having a bad day, I go, is it really like that? Is it just like that day?
I've had worse.
So that's the sort of resilience piece. But the most confronting bit I had, and we talk about this at our work, around emotional accountability.
That's a good one.
Have accountability for what you do and what you say. And as a junior manager, I had made a comment about someone and it got back to that person and that person confronted me. And I just remember feeling, embarrassed. Probably I was angry at the person who told that person. And so there was all of this. And what I wasn't doing was taking responsibility for what I had done.
Yes.
Which was I had a conversation about this person without their knowledge, and yet I wasn't prepared to take responsibility for it when it all blew up. So
when did you realize that whole sort of dynamic that you just described? When did you realize that?
Well, it wasn't straight away. It's taken a while. But I actually started to realize, and I think it was a conversation I had with a friend of mine, and her rule is I won't say anything about anybody else unless I'm prepared to say it to their face. And I think it's very simple, but it's very effective. And you create this level of accountability then. I'll be accountable for what I say. So if I do have a conversation about someone, it gets back to them. I say, yes, I did have that because I was frustrated with this and because X, Y, and Z.
So how does it translate now into the current, into the present with your team, that emotional accountability? I love this.
Yeah, so we talk about, so we've invested in a thing called zone culture as well. So, which for me is about using the frontal part of the brain, which is more rational and explained, but doing a lot of things with care and love as well. So that's the key part. But we talk about this emotional accountability piece. And if people are raising something, it's remembering. And so the way we talk about it is we have this term saying psychologically safe, but candidly direct. So emotional accountability doesn't mean that you're all sitting holding hands and singing Kumbaya. You can have really good conversations and great debate because it's not a hostile or a personal attack. It's actually, I appreciate that's your opinion. I don't agree with it. This is why I don't agree with it, and provide some sort of evidence and discussion. So you can have really robust discussions.
It's not a personal attack. It's about the topic.
Yeah. And then if you've got that understanding, if it starts to drift that way, you can say, hang on, I feel this is getting a little personal now between the two of you. Why don't we just step it back a sec? Well, let's get to where we've got to and pause for a moment. And that emotional accountability sits with everybody. So it's not my role as CEO to be the ringleader or the referee, I should say. Ringleader can have a very different connotation. The referee of it. Everyone sitting around that table has a responsibility.
So all your senior leadership team, all middle managers,
Yep.
even below?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And, we've had conversations where I see people talk about the zoo and the zone. We talk about being in the zone and being in the zoo. And so if behavior is like, oh, it's not fair, I never get so-and-so always gets to go to lunch first. And we say, oh, that sounds a little bit of zone language, a bit of zoo language there. And then we've sort of built on that, and we talk about what we call bed and or language. So below the line and above the line.
Yep.
So
Yep.
bed, it stands for blame, excuse, denial.
Mm-hmm.
And or, which is above the line, is ownership, accountability, responsibility. So I'll give you an example. If someone had come to me and I'd said, oh, I need that report by Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Friday comes, report's not done, have a conversation. The individual goes, look, I didn't get that report done because I've had so much on. I'm really, really busy at the moment. I've got so-and-so off sick. I haven't had time. That's all blame, excuse, denial. Now, you run that scenario again, and if the individual goes, look, I've had some sick leave. I've had to reprioritize other things ahead of this, so I haven't made it a priority, so I didn't get it done. Doesn't change the outcome.
Take responsibility.
But there's a lot more or language in that framework. After my youngest, who's 17, I use this at home a bit. She's like,
oh, no, really?
She does the eye roll. She's like, oh, okay, let me reframe it. She's like, I agreed to stay back late at work because they were short-staffed. And I was like, okay, thank you. That's your language.
Beautiful, because you empower people then to speak from their behalf, not finger pointing.
Yeah. And it's, there are times when things can't get done. And when you're also using that language, nothing's confrontational. Because if you're not finger pointing, then there's not a reversal of justification, because justification comes from feeling there's a blame apportionment going on. So I'm being blamed for something, therefore I need to justify my behavior. So,
I love this whole piece. In organizations, especially with the headcount that you guys have now at Police Hill, there's about 80 odd people, right?
Yeah, getting close to that. FTE is about 70 something. So 78.
So it's a significant number. How do you actually get everybody to do that? I mean, you guys have certain values like courage, so being courageous, and then this emotional accountability piece. How do you actually make sure that this kind of embeds throughout or permeates the whole organization? Because that's not easily done.
No, it's not. And so we're doing it on several levels. So the first and most basic one is, so I meet with every new starter. So within their first week, ideally within the first couple of days, they have a half-hour session with me. And I can tell they're nervous, usually because the CEO is meeting with them on the very first day. And some of these people have worked in organizations where they've never seen a CEO before. If you work for us, you'll get a bit sick of me because I'm always wandering the building. But I sit down with them and I actually sort of say, I want to talk to you about what's really important to me as a CEO and something I would hope is going to be really important to you. And that's culture. And culture is driven by behaviors. So then we talk about what are our behaviors. And I always think that CEOs, and I know I sometimes stand alone when I say this, the one most important thing, if CEOs focused on culture in their organization, everything else flows from that. You'll get fiscal accountability. You'll get happy staff. You'll get happy members or customers, whatever your target area is. Often what we focus on are KPIs and metrics that are missing the fundamental component. So I just spend half an hour talking about behaviors and culture and why that's important to me. And then I share something about me that they may not know, and I ask them to do the same. And, I've had
to be more personable.
Yeah. So I've seen their CVs. I sign off on all the appointments. We have it's not hierarchical, but we have that point where I think it's really important CEOs should have line of sight of who's being recruited into their organization. Now, I appreciate there are CEOs out there that might have hundreds and thousands of staff, but thinking about how you can better communicate and convey the importance of that. So I think that sets the direction, the path for the new employees. Then we've invested in training with zone culture and communication mastery. So we've put all of our senior leaders and our middle managers, so that cohort we call the Leaders Collective.
And which is how many people?
So that's with the SLTs, 16, 17 people, 18 people. And then what we're doing is we do some touch points with other staff as well to see if, and we're just in the process of looking at something now to see if we can get some, because there's been some interest outside of the leadership group, because everyone's hearing it and they're hearing the discussions and taking responsibility for what you say and your communication mastery. And, we're very clear at our organization, we don't talk about DISC as much. So DISC it's a tool, as you know, and the conversations we've always had is the difference about this program that we've done with you is that it's not about DISC, it's actually about mastering communication. And that whole emphasis, subtle, but important.
And you got an interesting one where you also linked zone culture and communication mastery together, which is the first time ever. And I think you masterfully put that together. So can you please explain how you basically pitched the value before we started doing the work?
Yeah, so we talk about, so we've already done a lot of work on zone culture. So this is about that emotional accountability, doing things from a position of care and love. So it's so we call it the heart. And where communication mastery actually gave us the brain, the head. So it's connecting the head and the heart. So that's why we thought it was a great investment, because it gives us that piece where, you can have the right emotions, but the ability to articulate that and have a conversation and master that emotion in a positive way is where you get that sort of level of difference. So we call it that we've invested in the head and heart of our senior leaders and managers. I mean, they've all had great hearts and heads to start with, don't get me wrong, but we're just taking it to the next level.
So what's the difference now? Because both projects have been concluded at the senior and middle management level. So
what I find when I'm having conversations with particularly the Leaders Collective, there's definitely a shift in it. So it's that pebble in the lake. You can see the ripple effect. There is, I'd call it courage. People are more comfortable saying things. We're completely rethinking one of our forums that we have, the Leaders Collective, because everybody, and weirdly, and as you know, SLT was having the conversation about, we don't think this meeting's working, it's not really. And then you had the other two cohorts, and they were going, we don't think this meeting's working. So everyone was thinking the same thing, which was fantastic. But what it wasn't doing is we weren't having that conversation in the meeting. What it's done is effectively create this opportunity for all of us to go, you know what, this isn't working. How do we make it work better?
That's all great stuff. And I love the emotional accountability, the fact that you guys are looking, to communicate openly and caringly. There's one particular thing where you actually beautifully demonstrated that very shortly after you got into your new role at Police Health. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, I also thought that was the moment I might be shortly leaving my role at the same time. So to put it into context, I've always been in roles that don't create a lot of public profile at all. So even running hospitals, you're kind of a little bit under the radar in some respects. So when I was fortunate to get the position of CEO of Police Health. We're part of a membership called the International Federation of Health Planners. And so that's health insurers and health providers from around the globe. And so I was fortunate to go to a conference in Lisbon, in Portugal. And so for context, I was 4 months into the role, so I was still in probation. So probation is 6 months. And went over to Lisbon. I'd taken some photos of the view from the hotel room. I'd taken a photo of my passport and a glass of champagne and posted it on Instagram. Probably not, and I look back now, not the right thing to do, but anyway. And I didn't have a private account. It was very public. I just didn't think about this sort of stuff. Had a great time at the conference. It was amazing. Came back and I got a phone call on a Sunday morning to say, I don't want you to panic, but there's a story in my, I can't think where it first broke, might have been the Sunday Mail, about, and they've got photos of your Instagram about, and it's something about private health insurance CEOs living it up in Lisbon.
Living it up.
And I was like,
whoops.
Whoops. And so I started to scroll through, and it just, it basically went from bad to worse. So what happened was the story was picked up. It was inferring that as CEOs of private health insurance, we're all fat cats, that it referenced at one of the restaurants we ate had a bottle that was $700, 700 euro for the bottle. We never even had that bottle, but it was just referenced in it. So it created all this article, and there were my photos from my account were used in the article, and then it got syndicated across all the papers and online newspapers, was on the news in several states. I had my friends from different states messaging me going, they were taking the mickey, but I was absolutely having a meltdown at this point. I had rung my chair, Peter, and said,
what was happening internally for you at that time?
I absolutely felt sick as a dog. I thought that I was going to be told to leave, that I had immense feelings of guilt because I had let the organization down, I'd let the board down, and I'd let my staff down. And then I was also angry because there were photos that I felt like my privacy had been violated. And there was a photo used of me dressed in a black tuxedo. I have to admit, it was a great photo, leaning against a vintage bar. But what was really frustrating is it had nothing to do with the Lisbon trip. That actual photo was taken the night before I headed out to a charity event that I had coordinated with the Rotary Club to fund the refurbishment of the neonatal nursery.
So things were taken out of context and just like used for clickbait and whatever.
Yep. And so I was like really angry, and I particularly struggled with this reporter. And I still do to this day, because I feel that my personal life was used as a way to titillate the audience. But I had seriously moved on. So what happened is I then went to work the next day. I called an all-staff forum. So I called everybody together, because we all work in the one building and the one site. And I explained what had happened. I had said, this is what has happened. I apologize to all of them for bringing the organisation into the name of police health into disrepute by being brought into this sort of equation, that I had never meant for this to happen. It was not the right thing for me to do, to take a photo of my passport and glass of champagne, which was promoting, this sense of luxury and privilege. So I had taken full responsibility for what had happened.
Which is coming back to your point about
that emotional accountability, what you say and what you do.
So you demonstrated there 4 months into the job. Well done.
I did get teary. I almost cried because I think the emotion was just flowing out. I then opened it up and said to staff, you can ask me whatever you like. And the very first question I got asked was, are you okay? And it was a very junior member of staff, and I remember this. And then the second question was, can you not sue the newspaper for, using stuff
slander
within your Instagram account? We talked about that. And it was probably that, for me, Bram, was the pure moment as a person, but secondary as a leader, where I realized by being true to myself, taking responsibility for a situation, it's not fair to blame the reporter. The reporter's doing a job. Right? The reporter has a job to do. I have a job to do. But owning it fully and not trying to suppress emotion and show people that I genuinely was upset and shaky and remorseful, that was far more powerful and much greater strength as a leader to show vulnerability. And vulnerability is strength. And I had a conversation with a particular member of staff. They've now left the organisation, and this was like 3 or 4 years after that episode. And she actually said to me, she said, you were great at building rapport when you first started, and you were already building relationships. She said, but when you did that, you cemented yourself
I was exactly
with
thinking about the
everybody.
same verb, cementing.
Because
That's right.
what we all saw was who you were as a person. And, for me, greatest learning, I'll be honest, it was emotionally the most challenging thing I've probably done in my career, to stand up in front of everyone and admit that I hadn't done the right thing. And I hadn't, because I hadn't done it in a way where I didn't think about consequences and context.
Big learning.
Massive learning. And that's why I think, we talked about this earlier on. There's no such thing as, I don't think there's no such thing as a bad decision or a wrong decision or getting it wrong. What it is you actually take away something and learn from it. So this was the best learning opportunity I've ever had.
I can imagine.
And I think from now on, if I do something, I can take accountability for it, talk about it openly, and not have this sense of shame and guilt, because we're human. We don't always get things the exact way we'd like them to go. What you do about it is more important, not about getting it right first time.
Obviously, you've taken a great leap of faith there, exemplifying the very things that you say that you guys are about. Would you now say that your staff has started also going down that path, following in your footsteps?
Well, I think they're following in their own footsteps, which is about that accountability piece. And, if any message that I could send to anyone who is responsible for leading people and managing, and managing people gives me I think it sort of engenders a sense of control, whereas leading people is about empowering individuals. So I like to say, for anyone who is leading people, is the greatest message or lesson you can provide is to lead by example.
Great.
And, there's this quote, and I always get it wrong, but I love it. And it's on my wall because it's got 4 elements, which is why I can only do the power of 3. You remember 3 things?
4 is it.
I always struggle with the 4th. But it talks about leaders set culture. What they reward is repeated. What they discredit stops. And the one that I think is the hardest to do consistently is what they tolerate is allowed. So that one time that someone says something and you just let it slide because you don't want to be uncomfortable, or you don't want to have to say, hang on, is that really in line with what we do? Every time you do that, the one time you do it, it sends a message to everybody else that, that behavior is kind of okay sometimes. So it's tough. Like, to be a good leader, it's a lot of work. And because you have to always be on and be prepared to not let it slide on this one occasion.
How do you keep yourself in check, Scott?
Well, I think I keep myself in balance. I love swimming. Mentally, I need that too. It's my recharge. So I find family, a little bit of exercise. I love reading. Reading's a great escape for me. Actually, I love nothing better than sitting on a rock looking at the ocean. I don't like the beach. I don't like sand. Weird. I love water and the ocean. But also, I give people the right and the authority to challenge me. And that's what keeps you genuinely accountable, because you can't say to everyone else, you need to be authentic, you need to be genuine, you need to be real, you need to have emotional accountability.
I love this piece. If I can just ask you another question on that. The authenticity part is great, but what about ego? A lot of, especially senior executives, it's very luring. So how do you deal with that?
And it's great because you can fall easily into the trap of being. So that's that comment I made about being externally referenced early on. So I learned something some time ago, the program I was on, leading an empowering organization. It was in the UK. And that led me to do this senior manager program through the King's Fund. And what they taught me was feedback is just that. You should look at feedback. So if someone says, oh my God, you're amazing, you're like the best person ever, acknowledge that for what it is. But they say, think of it as a bubble. but don't swallow it.
Mm.
Because then if someone says to you, I think you're really rude and obnoxious and I don't like your attitude, you're like, oh, they don't know what I'm talking about. Or you swallow it and then you believe you're obnoxious, rude. And so they talk about acknowledging that that is someone's perspective of you, just as you have a perspective about somebody else. So
and you're not just this or just that. You're probably a mixture of.
But you can't accept all the positive and ignore the negative. So if you're going to swallow it, you need to swallow all of it. So what they teach you to do is just observe it. Observe it for what it is. That is someone's perspective of their interaction with you on that particular matter. It's not, that is your truth. That is your true north. That is, fundamentally who you are. It is often behavior and feedback is transactional. It's based on a transaction that you're having.
And sometimes it says a lot about the person where that is coming from.
Yeah. And I think, to really keep your ego in check, your focus as a leader should be about how other people are feeling, not about how important you are.
Great.
So,
this is great. I really love it. We could keep on and on about all of this here, but look, I'm mindful of time. Should people want to reach out to you, are you happy for us to share your LinkedIn
definitely.
And obviously the website link and all of that?
Yep. Go for it. Not a problem at all. So, I feel I have been very fortunate in my career and I'm very grateful of where it's going. And, I think the stuff that we've done with you, Bram, has really set a palpable change. And I can see that. And what I'm getting is I'm getting that commentary from other managers and junior managers who have done the program now. They talk about this feeling, how things are feeling different. And we weren't in a bad place at all. This is about elevating us to another level. So
that's great.
Very happy for anyone to reach out if they're interested.
Well, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and work with you and your team. And so thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for coming in today and sharing so generously of your experience and be vulnerable and lead by example. Great. Well done.
Very strong. Thanks.